Good afternoon and welcome to the fourth session of the Animal Rights Summit on the VegfestUK online December 12th, 13th event. You can catch all of the live streams on the website vegfest.co.uk under live streams on the December page. You can watch them all afterwards, so if there's anything referred to, or if you want to watch this again, you can find it, refer to friends with it. It's easy to find vegfest.co.uk under live streams. This session today is going to be looking at the in-depth inside story to really the story behind this book and the author. Ethical Vegan. Ethical Vegan is now out in print. There we go, slightly better in the light there. It's out in print. It's a fabulous read. I highly recommend it. And we are thrilled to be joined by not only the author, Jordi Casamitjana, but also a number of the individuals involved in the case and the development of this story. So without further ado, just to say you can buy this book through the Viva shop online. So if you do want to have get a copy, do feel free. It's available. Ethical Vegan. Let's welcome the author, Jordi Casamitjana.
Hello, how are you?
Hi, Jordi. Nice to have you back. We've
Thank you.
enjoyed your presence already this morning, accompanied Jay Brave. A really interesting session where Jay had quite a number of questions for you about issues raised in the book, some of the morality, the ethics, some of the positions which you discussed in depth. I highly recommend listeners to refer to that. That's the Ethical Veganism with Joe Brave and Jordi Casamitjana earlier today. But this one is more about the actually inside story of the case, Jordi. So I know that you're going to tell us a little bit about the background of that. But first, I think you'd like to probably introduce your four guests today. Just to mention, there will be questions available if you're listening and you'd like to ask some questions. There will be some time for questions at the end to be discussed by the panel. And also in the comment section, the members of the panel will be happy to reply later on after the panel if we don't get to your question. But do feel free to ask your questions. And Jordi, without further ado, I shall hand over to your good self and then you can introduce your guests. And I shall pop back later.
Okay, thanks very much. So yes, as you know, my book has been published. The book has kind of essentially three stories intertwined. One is the story of veganism as a whole, the other story of my life and how I became a vegan. But the third, which is the one that we'll be talking mostly today, is about my legal case, which many people have heard about, that has to do with the protection of veganism as a philosophical ethical belief. So I would like now to introduce some of the people that are actually part of this story. And we kind of talk about the story in a chronological order. So I'll explain at the beginning what happened to me, and then other the guests will be kind of tipping in to carry on with the bits of the story they know. But let me introduce them all first, so if you can see them all in the screen. But let's start with Joe Hashman, if he's still there. And Joe, perhaps can you very shortly introduce yourself, say who you are?
Yeah, I'm Joe Hashman. I've been involved with animal rights since I was a kid. I've known you, Jordi, since I think it was 2013 when you joined the International Fund for Animal Welfare Enforcement team and was our manager. And we worked closely in that team. Prosecutions were successful against hunts, and obviously I've supported you throughout this as well.
Excellent. Okay. Also, we have Jeanette Rowley. Jeanette, please.
Hi, Jordi. Hi, Jordi. Hi. Thank you for inviting me. It's lovely to be with you. Well, my name's Jeanette Rowley, and I founded the International Vegan Rights Alliance in 2012, which is now the Vegan Society's international rights network. I'm the chair of the network for the Vegan Society. I advise the Vegan Society, and I also manage the Vegan Society's advocacy service, which is now the Vegan Rights Service.
Thank you, Jeanette. Let's move to Peter Daly. Peter, can you tell us who you are?
Hi, Jordi. I was Jordi's solicitor in his employment tribunal case, which established ethical veganism as a philosophical belief. And then after we had established that, securing an outcome arising from his dismissal. So my job was to prepare the case, plead it, deal with the respondents and with the tribunal, instruct counsel, and generally try and win, which is what we did in the end. And it was a great pleasure to do that.
Thank you, Peter. Alex, tell us who you are, please.
Thanks, Jordi. Yeah, nice to see everyone else as well. I'm a lecturer in cultural media studies, actually. I've been writing about veganism, vegan life practice, and relationships with non-human beings for last decade or so. And I'm a fellow author, I guess, with Jordi. And I've followed the legal tribunal case and the publication of the book through to this moment. And so I'm very much keen, I've been very excited and enthused by the story that the book covers, and I'm really excited to talk about it today.
Excellent. Okay, let's start with the story then. The story, I'll talk for about 5 minutes possibly about this. The story starts with an email I received. This third story starts with an email I received from my pension provider. I work at the League Against Cruel Sports at that time. I had rejoined it because I had worked with them in 2004. I left and I came back again in 2016. And in January 2017, I received an email of the pension provider telling me that my pension fund had kicked in. And that's what happens when you work in the UK. You are auto-enroll into a pension fund by your employer. From 2015, by law, you have to do that. And this pension fund is chosen by the employer. But it takes 3 months before this kicked in. So 3 months passed, I got this email, told me that I got the pension fund. I look at the title, I find it weird that didn't have the word ethical, because I remember when I joined the League in 2004, there was one that had the word ethical. So I looked into it. Being a vegan, I always want to check where my money goes. And I realized that most of the money was going to companies I would consider unethical, because they were pharmaceutical companies that test these on animals, petrol companies, tobacco companies that test on animals. I was surprised that it was happened. I raised the issue with my employers, who also kind of seemed a bit surprised and said that they would change it, that they didn't make that change themselves. That happened in previous management. But the story, I also asked them not to hold my contributions. I didn't want any penny of mine going into my salary, which is 6% of the salary goes into these pension contributions at the time. I didn't want any of that going into this. So they said, fine, we'll hold it, and then we find an alternative, and we'll then carry on with contribution. But that didn't happen. After a long time, my contributions were not whole, were still going on against my wishes. There was a lot of back and forth, a lot of changes in management as well that explain why things took longer. But about a year later, still the problem had not been solved, and management had changed. But a solution seemed to be at the cards, because one of the interim managers, the CEO, had been ill for a while, so there was an interim manager taking over, had said that they found a pension fund that had the title ethical in it, and if people didn't complain and staff didn't complain after this, by December, then they all will be changed to that one. It seems the solution had been found, but in January, in 2018, after talking to the new managing director that was coming in to kind of join in and explain what the situation was, he told me that change had not happened, and that it might not happen because what the previous management had done might not be right. That kind of made me worry, because we all assumed that we were in a pension fund, but we didn't. So, and I now knew this information, my colleagues didn't. And after interchange of emails in which I was asking for my colleagues to be informed, and I was getting messages saying that they could not be informed further, that they had been informed already, I decided to email all my colleagues telling them that the pension fund had not been changed to an ethical fund as they thought it would, that there were many ethical funds to choose. There were 9 at least for this pension provider, not just one, not just the one suggested by management at the time. And therefore, if they wanted to change it, they could do it. This is how I did it. I didn't tell them how I changed or which one I chose. And I thought that they could make their own decisions, because you can change your pension fund if you don't like it. But after I sent this communication, I received a letter from my employer saying that inviting me to a disciplinary hearing for failure to follow reasonable management instructions. I was surprised. I complained. Well, I didn't fail any instructions. And there was no investigation set up for this, and the accuser was the same person that would chair that disciplinary hearing. So I complained about that. I felt that the system was not fair. As a consequence of that, or immediately after that, another charge was added to my charge, the charge of serious insubordination. But there was an investigation carried on, and there was a change of chair, and the investigation found out that there was no case to answer from me for gross misconduct, which is what leads to suspension and dismissal. Nevertheless, the disciplinary hearing carried on. I was found guilty of gross misconduct, summary dismissed after a month of suspension, and here I was unemployed, not knowing what to do, and not knowing whether I had any rights to complain or to solve or to correct this problem. So at the time, though, I had an impression that the reason I was fired was that because I was a vegan. That's because the lack of dismissal and the talks in the disciplinary hearing that were recorded, by the way, mentioned my ethics several times, that my ethics clouding my judgment and things like that. So it made me think that the reason that rather than discipline me in any way, they decided to sack me, not to employ me again, is because my belief is the things that they didn't like. My belief were obviously belief in ethical veganism. But I wasn't sure whether that I could claim unfair dismissal somehow based on that belief. But I knew that there was somebody that had done something similar in the past, some sort of belief, similar anti-hunting, things like that, that had been successfully in employment tribunal. And that person, it was a friend of mine, Joe Hashman, that is here today with us. So before carrying on with the story, Joe, can you explain us very briefly what is several employment tribunal cases that you had that represent the precursor in a way to my case? Can you just let us know?
Yeah, well, I mean, you took your case under the 2010 regulations, didn't you?
Yes.
Yeah, well, the precursor to the 2010 regulations were the Employment Equality Religion or Belief Regulations 2003. And in 2005, I got into a dispute with my employees at the time, Shaftesbury Town Council, and it was a complicated issue, but to do with pigeons roosting in the town hall, amongst other things. And it was a lot. I mean, it took over 2 years to resolve, but as part of that, and I won. I claimed unfair dismissal, and I won that. But I also, at the Employment Tribunal in Southampton, tried to claim that I was discriminated against on the grounds of my philosophical beliefs, because the pigeons were one piece of the issues that they had with me, and also in the paperwork, in minutes from meetings and that, it was mentioned that they respected my animal rights views, but blah blah blah. But at that stage, it was new regulations, and I wasn't legally represented, so I did it myself with a Mackenzie's friend, and the Southampton Tribunal didn't carry that forward. They said that we didn't meet the criteria, which was fine. I mean, it was part of the story, but I thought the law didn't apply. And then in 2009, I was working as a gardener for a local garden centre, and I was only a part-time worker. I was doing a demonstration garden, but there was a couple of things happened at the same time, or within about 2 or 3 weeks of each other. First thing, there was some prosecutions for hair coursing in Yorkshire, which I was involved with filming the evidence of. And one of the people was Clarissa Dixon Wright, and it was quite a high profile case. And also at that same time, a local Hunt Terrier man tragically died in an accident. And then again, just before all this happened, I found out that 3 of the 4 directors of the garden centre where I worked were prominent members of the local South West Wilts Hunt, which I didn't realise when I was taken on by the 4th director, who was a friend of mine. So you see, it's quite complicated. But I got asked not to carry on anymore, and I phoned my friend, the director, and I asked him why, and I scribbled notes in my diary as we were having the conversation, and he said, it's a whole host of problems, blah blah blah, but he insinuated that there was a problem with me working there because of the hunting link. And I didn't realize that the funeral of this guy who tragically died was going to be held on a day when I was due to be at the garden centre, and they were going to have the wake in the garden centre cafe bit. So obviously that would have been awkward. So anyway, my neighbour said to me over the fence, you know, in the aftermath of this happening in September 2009, he said, "You're not going to let them get away with that, are you?" And I thought, no, but do something about this. And my sister-in-law saw something in the newspaper, Nicholson versus Granger, or anyway, an environmentalist guy who didn't fly on a point of principle, but his bosses thought it'd be quite a jape to send him on a plane to Ireland to pick up a file of facts, which they'd supposedly left in an office, and make him fly. Anyway, it was reported in the paper that he claimed under the 2003 regulations for discrimination on grounds of philosophical, religion or belief on his environmental ethics, and he was defended by Shah Qureshi at Bindman's. So, and again, it was like, wow, that's amazing. That's cropped up right now. So I made an appointment to see Shah, and I told him what had happened far more articulately than I've just done now. And he said, "Yeah, I think you've got a case." And we had a case, and we had to go through the same process as you did, and we had to, you know, those 5 things. It's got to be cogent, it's got to be worthy of respect in a democratic society, and all that jazz. We had to pass all those things, but I claimed that my philosophical belief wasn't veganism, because that I wasn't ready for that. I don't think anybody was ready for that at the time, but I claimed philosophical belief in the sanctity of life, and especially being anti-fox hunting and hare coursing. And Ivan Hare from Blackstone's Chambers, I don't know if you know him, Peter, what a bloke. And it's such, I mean, it's the feeling you have when you have good legal representation, and you're standing up in court, and you know you're right, and you know what they've done is wrong, and you know you should win, but you don't know how. But when you've got someone stood next to you who you just know, whatever the bench ask, whatever the defense throw at you, he will be able to just put them right. So so that's my experience. So we won. And obviously, you know, when I first met you, before we became friends, I think you mentioned, "Oh, you're the guy." And so it's really nice to be able to provide a bit of help on the way.
Yeah, and that's basically how I was at the time. I didn't know the details. I know that Joe had won somehow. Joe was a close friend of mine. So, and I had not been able to talk to anyone because there was a suspension of 1 month imposed on me with a very general term saying, "Don't speak to anyone connected with this organization." Everybody I knew was connected. So I had not spoken to anyone, and decided to go and visit Joe, not just to learn a bit more about the case to see whether I can then use the same idea, but also just to tell the story to someone, because I was dying to tell the story, to find out whether my case had any grounds or not. So he wanted to explain it. And Joe, I'll go back to you now, because I want you just to tell us how you remember my visit that day when I came to your place in Dorset, and ask you to listen to my story and what you recall from that day.
Well, you were confused, disorientated, highly anxious. You needed to talk. You needed to offload. I mean, I hadn't spoken to you. I had one brief contact with you the month before, because I'd written a blog for the League, which they published on their website like about the day before you were suspended. And we were in contact with each other about this and that, and I couldn't get through to you, and nobody could say what was going on. You know, I was like, what's happened to Jordi? And I had a bad feeling. And obviously I remember we had a brief conversation. You said, "I can't actually talk to you. You know, things have happened, blah, blah, blah." And you were all over the place when you came here. I mean, yeah, manic. But, you know, I think you say in the book that you came here in flight mode and you left here in fight mode. So that's good. Because obviously you told me what had happened to you. I mean, I knew straight away, you know, if I could do it, albeit on a precursor regulations, but I knew that if I could do it, you could do it, because you're far more extreme than I am.
Right. Well, it did work for me. That meeting gave me the information I needed to change my mood, as I describe in the book. And I also asked you which lawyer should I call, and then you said, well, I use Bymans. Why don't you go for Bymans? So that's where I went. And Peter Daly, who works for Slater & Gordon now, but at the time he worked for Bymans, is the lawyer I was assigned to when I first sent an email, or call actually, and asked, can I meet one of you lawyers? Peter, can you perhaps tell us what you remember of that first meeting and when you heard about the case?
Sure. I think the first I heard about it was Shah Qureshi, and I remember him walking past my desk one day, and he said, "Peter, I've got this new case, and he said, I can't do it, but I think you'd be great." And I said, "Sure, what is it?" And he said, "Is veganism a protected philosophical belief?" And that was it. And I said, "Okay, yeah, great. Send me the email." So he sent through the note that had been taken of your call, Jordi. I can't remember who it was that you spoke to, but there was a note of your call which kind of summarized the key facts of it. And you had an appointment in to come and see me. And what I tend to do before a first appointment is get all the papers together and then put them together into a sort of index paginated bundle, if you like, a single PDF, and then read through them all ahead of the meeting. And I Googled this question about philosophical belief. Does ethical veganism meet the test, which Joe alluded to, which is the test in Granger and Nicholson, which, as I said, as Joe said, was one of Shah's cases. And there's all this correspondence. You know, I remember having discussions around it, whether veganism met the test, sometime before, I think even with Shah. And then you look on, and there's just huge amounts of debate around it. And one of the things which Jeanette actually flagged up to me much later on was when the Equality Act 2010 was being passed, and when the 2003 regulations were getting put into the Equality Act 2010, the Equality and Human Rights Commission drew up a code of guidance, basically, to explain how the new law was going to work. And one of the things that they said was, this will mean that existing philosophical beliefs are recognised as protected under the Act. And in the draft copy of this guidance, which went to Parliament, it said that ethical veganism, or veganism, was a good example of a philosophical belief that would satisfy the test. Now, this guidance went into Parliament. Parliament dealt with it, and the guidance was then issued, but the paragraph around veganism had been removed. But so I was fascinated. So I had this meeting booked up with Jordi, and he came in to meet me, and I remember a very smart guy coming in. Big part of my job is meeting people who've been through the mill at work. And people can have a number of different reactions to that. Some people can be extremely emotional, quite understandably. You find people who suffer from genuinely seismic mental health difficulties because of things that happen at work, post-traumatic stress disorder and so on. And Jordi came in, and he was clearly very upset with what had happened to him, but also extremely clear, and he knew what he was about. And he had already put his own sort of brain power to the case, and he'd already, probably through you, Joe, I don't know, but he already knew broadly what the case needed to be about, and had started putting the kind of the facts onto the legal structure. So I just found Jordi incredibly easy as a client in the first meeting. Sometimes, you know, it can be quite tricky to get clients to stick to the core ideas, because, as I say, they can be quite upset or distressed. But Jordi was very clear. Usually, what happens in those meetings is you start off at a high point. So you kind of say, well, you know, I've been dismissed because of my age or race or sex or disability or whatever it may be, or because I blew the whistle or whatever whatever it is, and you look at the legal test, and then you apply that to the facts, and you ask the client to explain what has happened to them. And so you start off at this high level, this is the legal test, this is what we have to satisfy. And then as you go through the meeting, very often what happens is the facts aren't quite on point, because real life doesn't happen cleanly and neatly. And it very often is the case that there's a legal test, but in reality, things are a little bit more confused or a little bit more convoluted than that. But the amazing thing I remember about the first meeting I had with Jordi was, we're going through the documents and we're going through the chronology and who said what to whom and the order in which things happen. And you suddenly realize this is just a really strong case. I mean, yes, you're going to have a hurdle of having to establish the philosophical belief. But if you can do that, it seems pretty obvious that Jordi has been dismissed because he is an ethical vegan. And they haven't even really pretended otherwise. Jordi touched upon it, but in the dismissal letter, there's a line in the dismissal letter that says, words to the effect, we considered whether any penalty short of dismissal would have been appropriate, but in your case, because of the strength of your beliefs, we have to dismiss you. And you
Well, since we lost Peter at this instant, well, it's kind of a good point to go to the next person, because one of the things that Peter told me is that he, when I realized I could not afford him, I didn't have the money to do it, that I could crowdfund for this case, and that might give the fund. So that meant I had to start going out and just carry on with the bit, Peter. I had to carry on looking at my case as I will need support here. I will need support from other organizations, from other people. I can do this by myself. That's when I contacted Jeanette and the Vegan Society and any groups. And so I'm going to you, Jeanette, because at one point I did send an email, I did call you, I did explain the case. If you can kind of tell us what you remember of that first contact.
Yes, Jordi, I do remember you calling me. I think we spoke twice during the summer of that year. I wasn't with the Vegan Society at the time. I was still with the International Vegan Rights Alliance. And I remember moving from my couch to the garden because I knew you weren't going to stop talking, and I knew I might as well sit somewhere comfortable. I think you talked very clearly and coherently about your situation for probably 25 minutes without stopping. And it was obvious to me that you had a very clear idea of what was wrong, and you had a full recollection of the circumstances. I don't remember whether you were actually looking for financial support from the International Vegan Rights Alliance, but I do remember telling you the structure of the alliance, and that we don't actually get any funding, and we actually sustain ourselves. It was an unsustainable organisation. But yes, I got a sense that you knew very clearly what direction you were going.
Yes, and I find your conversation very helpful, because that confirmed that the idea I had of having a good case seemed to be the case.
Yes, Jordi, because I probably would have not just talked about the equality provisions, but I probably would have given you information that I usually give to anyone who contacts me, that the equality provisions relate to the European Court of Human Rights. So the European Court of Human Rights had heard a case about veganism. Well, the commission, it was the former commission in the early 1990s. So when the Equality and Human Rights Commission in Great Britain said that veganism is protected in human rights law and therefore could be protected under employment equality, the Equality Act provisions, it was because they have a statutory duty to inform society and monitor the provisions. They're independent from government, and what they are doing is stating what the European Court of Human Rights has said. So if the European Court of Human Rights says that they find veganism to be within the scope of the meaning of the right to freedom of religion, belief and conscience, then there's a duty really to make sure that's incorporated in our law. So I probably would have talked to you about this as well, and that probably would have given you a little bit of more strength of conviction as well.
Indeed. And then later on, when I contacted the Vegan Society did help a lot as well.
Yes.
They also, I was crowdfunding. I didn't get all the money I needed for the pre-hearing on the ethical veganism, and the Vegan Society did help economically to get that amount I needed, just the pre-hearing, not the full merit hearings later on. Yes. But at one point I went public. So I will go to Alex now, because it went public. I started to talk about my story. Initially, only the Guardian took the news. Eventually, the BBC got it. And when the BBC put it out there, everybody was talking about it. So I want to know, Alex, when did you hear first about this story? What were your first thoughts about it when you first encountered my case?
Sure. I think I first heard about it when a mutual friend of ours, Kim Stallwood, who's obviously been in animal rights activism for 40 odd years, when he shared the story on social media, and obviously knowing and trusting Kim's sort of word, as you said, as you opened, Jordi, and as you say a lot in your book, we vegans tend to question everything, so we don't normally just accept every link that comes to us, but when it comes to us from a trusted friend, we look at it, and so I looked into it, and for me, it resonated with, and it made me experience that I'm not the only person who donated to your crowdfunder. Thousands of, hundreds and thousands of vegans did, and probably because we've all had experiences where we think, oh, we really need that protection, And one example being, I'd had a 2 or 3 year battle with the catering facilities at my university to improve their provision of vegan options. And it was only when, and I used to do this quite regularly, and get batted off and not spoken to and ignored or whatever. And it was only when I sent an email to the director of facilities quoting the 2010 equality law and their translation into 2012 workplace legislation that I got a call half an hour later to say, okay, we're going to look into this. And I saw, oh, there's something really powerful here that is important. So not only is it, it was a very strange story to begin with for many people, because as you know, we've all got so many things coming at us from different directions, social media wise. You're thinking, hold on, this is an animal organization, and the person who's been sacked is a vegan. What's going on there? That was a very confusing element, and I think people had to dig into it a bit more and find out, well, that makes it a little bit worse. That makes this story a little bit worse. And so if even vegans in animal organizations are having difficulty, then this is a story that really needs to be explored, because actually it means that we really need to go further than what we've already got. And that's why I then decided, and I'm sure it's why hundreds of others decided, that they wanted to support this campaign, because if you were having trouble with it and couldn't deal with it in an animal organization, what chance the rest of us? So we needed to go further, and I think that's what that's why. And
I thank you for that. And hundreds of people donated, and like you represent in this group, all of them, everyone for donating what they could. But yeah, there was a feeling that was not just my case. There was a case that was affecting everyone. I'm going to go back to Peter now, because I want you, if you can explain what are the requirements of the Equality Act in terms of philosophical belief. What needs to happen in general, which is what happened in our case. So you can just give us a short summary of it.
Sure. Well, the test. So to go back, the Equality Act is the act that deals with discrimination in the workplace and elsewhere, and the way that is treated at law is that an individual has a protected characteristic, which might be age or race or sex, and they then, sorry, I've dropped out very briefly there. So you have various protected characteristics, and one of those is philosophical belief. Philosophical belief is slightly different from many of the other protected characteristics, because it has to be identified and established that it is a belief that requires or sort of meets the particular standard. And the way that is assessed is through a 5 or a 6 stage test, which comes from a case called Granger and Nicholson. It's the way that the test works is that it's a test about the belief in general, but it's also a test about the belief as held by the individual. So there are 5 sections to this. Is it genuinely held? I'm going to try and remember these off the top of my head and probably get them wrong. I apologize in advance. Is it genuinely held? Is it clear and cogent? Is it a belief rather than an understanding of the current state of events? Is it worthy of protection in democratic society? And the 5th one, which I did indeed forget what it was, but there is a 5th one as well. So you have to look at the belief in and of itself in isolation from the individual, and then you've also got to look at the belief as held by the individual. So one individual who we haven't mentioned yet today, who played an extremely important part, was Jordi's barrister, Chris Milsom. Many barristers will simply turn up and do a hearing or do a trial, but Chris Milsom was involved in the case right from the get-go. And very much helped us to build it, and was very important in all of that. So what we did as a team of 3, if you like, Jordi, Chris, and myself, was to think about how are we going to evidence whether or not ethical veganism is a clear and cogent set of principles. What does the evidence for that look like? So part of that was going to Jeanette and talking to Jeanette about these things. Jeanette was a huge resource for us and just really opened my mind to all sorts of aspects of this. We then had to look at, how did Jordi's particular brand of ethical veganism manifest itself? We had to look at, what nuts and bolts day-to-day evidence did we have of Jordi's veganism? And that involved Jordi going through his inbox to look for receipts for vegan products and mailing lists for vegan meetups and correspondence that he'd sent to hotels and airlines saying, I'm traveling with you next week, what's your vegan option? And then on occasion actually pulling them up afterwards and saying, you said you had a vegan option but you didn't. All sorts of things like this. And so what we ended up with was I think it was 1,400 pages. Is that right, Jordi?
Yes.
1,400-page bundle of evidence, which covered everything from, the Vegan Society definition of ethical veganism to academic papers around how philosophers treat the question of ethical veganism, to Jordi's shopping lists, to I mean, you name it. It was all in there. Some of which as well was in Catalan, wasn't it, and needed translation. So there was that element to it too, and it was just a question of building up this whole picture, and then preparing a witness statement from Jordi and legal submissions, which applied these literally nearly 3 reams of paper to this relatively open-ended 5-stage Granger and Nicholson test, and setting out how the evidence met the test. Is that kind of what you need, Jordi? Yeah.
That's common. Yeah. So we had to split the case in a pre-hearing about the ethical veganism question only, and a full merit hearings about whether I was discriminated. And initially, we started the case as a double case of discrimination and whistleblowing. We thought that we could win it for either way, so we had that. So the whistleblowing aspect will be done later. But the pre-hearing on the 3rd of January this year, 2020, was only to answer the question of whether ethical veganism is a protected belief and whether I was an ethical vegan. And we had several witnesses, and that was in Norwich Employment Tribunal. And Jeanette was one of the witnesses. Can you just tell me very quickly about what your impression of the actual day that you were there? I can tell you more about it, but what do you remember from that day?
Yeah. Well, we were all unprepared for the day. I think we didn't expect to have the judgment on the day. Judge Postle had obviously done his work the day before, and it was a very efficient processing of the tribunal. It was absolutely amazing, and I think, given the shortage of judges, it was the best thing to do. It was so clear. There was no other decision to be made. So it was fantastic, very efficient.
Indeed. And in fact, neither you or I gave any oral testimony. So the judge had seen all the evidence the day before. The entire day was just for him to read that. And so he had made his mind, obviously. And when we were asked to give our testimony, we only confirmed that our written statements were ours, and that was sufficient. And in fact, before our third witness, Jeff, a professor from Oxford, came, the judge had already made the decision. And of course, then it came out, and he obviously said that, yeah, it was definitely a protected philosophical belief under the Equality Act. Overwhelmingly, he used this word. And the press was out there, wanted to know what happened. And from that point onwards, everybody in the world talk about the story. And you, Alex, were one of those that somehow find out about the outcome of my pre-hearing. Do you remember how you find out and what your feelings were at the time?
Yeah, I'm pretty sure it was through the BBC, because then it started circulating on social media. I think one of the wonderful things about the outcome was that it was so clear, so definitive, so quick, that there was no ambiguity for the media to play off as a us v them, bad v good, vegans v meat eaters opportunity. There was just none of that opportunity. I mean, I was quite involved with the grassroots group Animal Rebellion during the 2019 rebellion, and they're in charge of the media and press. And one thing that we tried to do all the time was wrong foot the media, because the mainstream media loved the story of vegans v farmers, or vegans trying to lose people, animal activists trying to lose normal people their jobs, etc. Because provocation sells, it keeps the audience tuned in. And the lovely thing about what the judge did and the things that you all did, the things that you brought together that made the judge's job so easy, was that it actually wrong-footed the media. As in, there's no controversy here. There's no pitting X v Y. There's no pitting vegans v the rest of the workforce. It's just flat out, this is the case. It's like this is a protected ethical belief. Oh, now let's move on and let's get to the next story. So in a way, it was incredibly positive, simply because it was so clear. And that's what I remember most about it. And that's what I remember being able to pick up and use in other communications. Now you take that back to my workplace, or many of the other vegans around the country could take back to their workplaces. So yeah, so it was out there straight away, and it was unequivocal. And it was just, brilliant. For once, the media are not trying to spin this in a way that makes it a battle between one person's ethics and another person's ethics.
All right, let's move to Peter now, because that was the pre-hearing, but there was a full merits hearing in February and March. Very shortly, can you summarize what happened in the full merits hearing?
That was the trial. Up until that point, the League Against Cruel Sports had not really resisted. They had not resisted the question of whether or not veganism was a protected philosophical belief. And at one point, it looked as though that would just be kind of nodded through by the tribunal, which wouldn't have been any good for us whatsoever, because we needed the judgment to show that other people could rely on the same philosophical belief. But so up until sort of January and the publication of the judgment from Employment Judge Postle, there wasn't a huge amount of friction between us and the respondent. But once the philosophical belief was recognised by the tribunal, we then had to move into the trial as to whether or not you had been discriminated against and dismissed because of your philosophical belief. And that was a much more sort of traditional, straightforward, contested employment tribunal case. And to put it, basically what happened was you had two sets of people on the employment. On the employer's side, their case was that you weren't dismissed because of your belief, but that you were dismissed for other reasons, which I don't think were entirely clear. You gave evidence. I can't remember how long did your evidence last for, Jordi? I think it was a good day. 2 days.
2 days.
Yeah. And so there was a reasonable temperature of cross-examination in there. There was similar cross-examination from the chief executive of the League Against Cruel Sports. And to be, what then happened was a discussion was held and an agreement was reached, which said that they accepted that you had been dismissed because of your ethical veganism, which was a protected philosophical belief. They withdrew from the hearing and basically conceded the entire case through a statement that they issued to the media, which was about as good an outcome as anybody can get, really. You can't, even in a hearing that moves on to a conclusion and a judgment, you cannot force an employer to admit wrongdoing. You cannot elicit an apology. A tribunal cannot order an apology. You can get a judgment in which a tribunal says, the employer has behaved badly. But what the League Against Cruel Sports did, to their credit, I think, in the end, was to say, look, actually, we shouldn't be here. We should not have defended this. Jordi was quite right. He was dismissed because of his ethical beliefs, his ethical veganism. So I think it was an outcome that I think was extremely positive. And I'm sure you felt the same, Jordi.
Absolutely. And you, Joe, you've been through all these 2 years litigations by me, supporting me, hearing me complain. Every news I had, any delay, I would contact you to get support. What's your general impression of how I kind of experienced that whole 2 years, now that you probably is the person who knows more about this?
Well, I remember when we were at I4, and every time evidence came in and there was a sniff of a chance that it would have breached the Hunting Act, you would go into mode, and that might, yeah, Peter's laughing, and that might involve not sleeping for days on end, living in the offices, just total, complete focus. And I do know how it feels, having been through it, and you have to be strong and you have to be focused and you have to know that you are right, and you were strong and focused. And I think the League realized that they had picked on the wrong ethical vegan, because we all know you, so we all know what a complete attention to detail man you are. So you did what you needed to do. Can't say more than that. And what an outcome. You got the right people, you got the right support, you did everything you needed to do to defend yourself, and that is really hard work.
Yeah,
you must be,
but also because I got the support of the people. Without the support of the people, you get lost in an imaginary world. You need people put you back to the ground, back to reality. All of you play a role in that. Okay, let's go to Alex now for the book. My book talks about this story. You read the book. You saw the story from the outside as a supporter, but not that much from the inside like the rest of us. How do you feel about the story in my book? Did you learn things about it? And how do you feel about the book in general? And then I'll ask the question about the book to the rest of you.
Sure. One of the things I really loved about the book was that it's a very long opening chapter and it could have even been longer, because what it does, it sets the entire history of the idea of veganism and the contributions that have been made to it over 2,500 years by ancient Greeks, ancient Indians, ancient philosophers, the Buddha, right the way up to the present day. And what is good about that, and it interweaves the story with your story, your personal story, and the story of this case, is that it places this moment in the long history of all of these people who have fought for animals and have fought for respectful relationships with non-human beings. And what it does, it establishes the fact that this has always been an ongoing battle with the mainstream status quo of the way that we have relationships with animals. But what it shows is evidence of lots of successes and lots of ideas that will not die along the way. And it requires people to do that, and it requires action. And one of the things you say about the book very much is that we act on our beliefs. We don't just reflect upon them; we act on them. And this entire moment, and this the pre-hearing and the hearing, the tribunal and the employment case, they are acts that have changed the social state, the social setting and status for vegans to go forward. And I learned an awful lot about the book. I learned a great deal about your personal stories, your backstory, the zoology, the wasps, the monkeys, like everything there, and your long-term commitment to animals. So not just, at the heart of veganism is our respect and relationship with animals. And what I found out about the case specifically was about, the real detail, again, as Joe just said, the detail that was there and that was always there. And as Peter said, the league should never have defended it, because what is very clear from the details that you put forward in the book is the cast iron case that you had from the beginning. So for me, the weaving of those three stories, it's very Aristotelian, really, in a way, isn't it? Sort of like, like harking back to some of the great Greek philosophers who actually, like Pythagoras and Porphyry, who talk about sort of like our relationships with animals. It's a wonderful book for placing what we do now as vegans and acting on our beliefs for animals in the context of what has gone before. And I think that's really critical, because actually people in the movement who have been in the movement for a long time roll their eyes a little bit at all of the people who come along with the new ideas, and go, we tried that 30 years ago, And what we've needed for a long time is actually a really very accessible, big chapter on that history, and you provide some of the groundwork for that in terms of the long history, which I think is great. And just one last thing before I let other people talk about it, is that one of the things I like about it, that within the vegan movement, within the animal rights movement, there is often this debate between, or this tension between, sort of the pragmatists and the idealists. Like, can we take small steps? Do we have to hold to sort of like, idealist positions? And actually your book blends that perfectly. It says, don't let's waste our arguments on each other, people. Come on, there's exploitation of animals taking part. And the thing, there's one, and perhaps it's something to do with the fact that English is your second language, which you speak perfectly. But the fact is, when it's your second, it's not your first language. It's not the one you grew up with. But therefore, put together with your detailed, mindset, when you want to say something, you really think about how to say it. And there's this one phrase upon this battle between sort of idealism and pragmatism that I've really underlined is, what unifies all ethical vegans is not their success in avoiding animal exploitation, but their effort in doing it, considering the circumstances. And that, for me, really sums up what this book is about, because that's exactly what you've done in this case. It's exactly what's happened with the people who supported you in this case. And it's exactly part of the way that we can move forward. Like, it's idealism and pragmatism together. And actually, this book really does a great job of blending those two. Thanks
very much, Alex. I don't know whether all of you have read the book or a bit of it. Jeanette, have you read the book or a little bit of it? And do you want to make any comment, Jeanette?
Jordi, you put me on the spot now, because I haven't read it at all. No, I haven't. So I can't make any comment whatsoever. But I know I did promise you that over Christmas, when I have time off, I'm going to try and sit down and read it. So watch this space.
Peter, have you read it already?
And I have to confess, it took me a while to read it, because it came in through the post, and my kids obviously know who you are, Jordi, because they've been following the case, and we talk about it a lot at home. My eldest is vegan, so this book came in, and so my eldest came and she said, "Oh, Jordi wrote a book." I said, "Yeah," and so she picked it up. So that was it. It was gone for the first week or 2 weeks that it was in the house. And I'd say to her, how's Jordi's book? She says, really good. It's really good. So an 11-year-old can pick it up and read it. So I eventually got to read it, and I just think it's great. The way that it puts something that was very sort of current and urgent, personally for me, in this broader context. So your case being this thing that we did last year and this year. And puts it in the context of this much longer thread of human history, and then puts your personal story within that context too. So the way that the three threads of the book are interlinked, I just think it's an incredibly good piece of writing, and I just really enjoyed reading it. And I think I suspect that an awful lot of the people watching this video today will be people who have an investment in the particular philosophical belief of ethical veganism, But I don't think you actually do need to even have that. I think you can just pick up this book and read it because it is just a damn good read. And it's also the first time I've ever been in a book as well, which was a slightly odd experience for me. So thank you for that. But yeah, it's a great book and it's a great achievement. And for you to have knocked it out in, what was it, 3 months or 4 months in lockdown as well, is you're either an incredibly talented writer on top of everything else, or you've got an incredibly talented editor, or both.
Well, I would not say that I am an incredible writer. I have the advantage of have a pandemic that allowed me to write 9 hours a day without any interruption. Joe, did you manage to finish the book, or are you still reading it?
Oh, I have read it. What it is, I have read it, and what it is really accessible, and it's also very challenging at the same time. So for someone like me, who, you know, thinks I know it all, I'm a vegan, blah, 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 there's things in there that really are uncomfortable. But if I was a carnist, if I ate meat and I wanted to know more, I could pick it up and it would educate me. So I think it's brilliant. And I love the fact that you've communicated so clearly, Jordi, because without clear communication, you just can't impart information to people. And, you know, that's what you've done really well. So good, man.
Thanks very much. Tim, perhaps now is the time for you to join us if you still...
Can I say one more thing? Can I say one more thing?
Yes.
So I don't know if this applies. Peter, you might be able to confirm this, but when I took my case for the garden centre, obviously it cost a lot of money, and Jordi, you've had to raise a lot of money. Now, my understanding, what Shah told me was, if you have house insurance, then you will have a clause in your house insurance that covers your legal costs when you are in, or is it mortgage or something like that, but it will cover in legal costs if it's an employment case. And so, you know, you didn't have that, so you had to go down another route, but I did, so that's how I funded it. Now, that means that any vegan who has, is it house insurance or is it a mortgage or something like that, but any vegan can find the funds to do this if they need to.
It's called legal expenses insurance, and typically it won't, you can't get the policy after your employment dispute arises. You have to have it already. If you've got it, it's fantastic.
Yeah.
But it's not a silver bullet, and if you've already got a problem in the workplace or in education or whatever it may be, it's probably more likely than not that a legal expenses insurance policy wouldn't cover it. And that's before we even get onto the fact that those policies are underpinned by EU law. So what happens after Brexit? But that's probably a discussion for another day. But those policies are really great if you've got them at the right time and you've got the right policy.
Come on, Tim, up to you now.
Yeah, I've been listening. It's been very interesting. So, Jordi, this is your third talk about the book, various guests, and each one becomes more and more interesting. I've had the opportunity to read most of your book, and agree with all of you to say that it's accessible, that it's easy to read, it's fun, and it's challenging. And I agree with you, Joe, particularly there's bits that actually Jay Brave talked about. You talked about, Jordi, this morning in the other session about, there are some issues in there. And it's been interesting to hear you expand on them. You may be interested, because you're surrounded here by some really strong supporters who've really supported you through what I know must have been quite traumatic, very exhausting at times, quite nerve-wracking. Courts are never easy. They're always going to test you. And although you had a really good case and some really good support, I know that, it wasn't always plain sailing. I should hold my hands up here and say, interestingly, Alex, I remember you noted when you got the receiving from Kim, news of the crowdfunder, and you said, oh yeah, you supported it. I got to say, I was a little bit the opposite. Initially when I saw your case and I saw what was going on, I was a bit. I think I had some concerns about, it might be a bit divisive. League Against Cruel Sports have been clients of ours. You know, we have friends there. Was this going to help, you know, or was this going to hinder? Was it going to be part of the problem, or was it going to be part of the solution? And I was curious. There's a little bit of a fence here, I have to say, and I was initially, I have to probably say, more negative than positive. I didn't support your crowdfunder, for instance. Not that that's any particular, generally, you know, limited on that, but it's a really good example of how you've worked hard and the support has come in. And, you know, think about the support the Vegan Society provided and some of the unseen, unheard, spoken, dedicated work that goes on, which isn't in the forefront of vegan activism. And, you know, it's perhaps rarely acknowledged, but I think this book acknowledges some of that work that goes in behind the scenes, long-term, with long-term goals. And, you know, thanks to the Vegan Society for standing by Jordi and providing so many resources and support there. And Jordi, you know, thanks to you really, because you dedicated a big chunk there and you took that on and you saw it through and you made sure that the people like me who were perhaps in doubt of it actually were then convinced, because we saw what you'd done and achieved. And, you know, the support you've had, Joe, I can see you've brought a lot there. And Peter, you know, obviously you won that case. That was great, you know. So what can I say except to end on a saying to say thank you, and I recommend the book. Here it is, Ethical Vegan, Jordi Casamitjana. We will be continuing these discussions at a later date. I hope, Jordi, I'd like to invite you, and indeed all of you, if you should ever want to join us again in further discussions, perhaps at the end of January, and especially if there's some important updates and things that occur that are of historical or particular sort of value and interest on that area. So on that note, thank you very much for your panel. There are some questions, if there are. I don't think there are actually, but maybe a discussion first a bit later. But thank you very much, and perhaps if you'd just like to say goodbye.
Yes, thank you very much, and bye everyone. Bye.
Take care.
Thanks.
Nice
Bye.
to meet you all.